Hello, I'm Tanner Olson, and this is episode 1 of Walk a Little Slower, a podcast where I share a thought, a poem, a question, or a message. This is a podcast where you are invited to slow down, to lean in, to hold fast, and to eventually keep going. Welcome. It has been a while since I have released a podcast. If you've been following along over the years, I started a podcast called the Written to Speak podcast back in 2019. That podcast soon became the Just Happy to Be Here podcast, a podcast that I loved doing with my good friend, Taylor Jarman. Taylor and I, we would share stories. We would discuss what national day it was. And for the record, I am recording this on January 28th, National Blueberry Pancake Day. Also, National Kazoo Day. But during our podcast, we would also remind each other of the goodness of God. And after a few months away, I think it's time for me to jump back in and start a new podcast. I guess I just really enjoy talking into a microphone. I chose the name Walk a Little Slower after my latest book. It's an invitation and reminder that I need to hear often, to walk a little slower, to slow down. It was a great title for a book, and I thought, well, why not name it the podcast too? On this podcast, I'll share new writings, poems, questions, and messages of hope. This is a space where I'd like to go deeper and invite you into what I am creating and learning. And who knows, maybe I'll even bring a guest on from time to time, or perhaps I'll finally convince Taylor to bring back the Just Happy to Be Here podcast. But this is going to be a space, a place where I share what I'm working on, what I'm learning, those who I'm talking with. So it's going to be a random podcast of sorts, but ultimately, I hope that it brings you a little bit of hope and encourages you to walk a little slower and breathe a little deeper. To start the podcast, I'd like to share with you an excerpt from my book, Walk a Little Slower, a collection of poems in other words. And if you haven't grabbed a copy of Walk a Little Slower yet, well, I'll be honest, I think you should. I really do. I think you will enjoy it. You can find it on Amazon, ever heard of it? Or at writtentospeak.com. This episode will set the tone for the episodes to come. So, with that, let's jump in. I was 8 years old the first time my grandma told me to slow down. My brother and I were 35 minutes away from the comforts of our bunk bed, bicycles, and parents spending a weekend with grandma and grandpa in DeLand, Florida. I can't remember why we were there, but that's where we were. When you're 8, it's your job just to go with the flow, to say please and thank you, and when you're feeling brave, to eat the vegetables the adults put on your plate without putting up a fight. On our first day with our grandparents, they took us to KFC for dinner. It was 4 p.m, but we were told this was dinner and not a snack. As a kid, I believed KFC was what kings and queens ate at their banquet tables. I can't remember who suggested we go there to eat, but let's be honest, it was probably me. I've always had a sophisticated palate. My brother would eat whatever you put in front of him. I was always the difficult child, a picky eater, only wanting what can be best described as fair food. To this day, fried chicken tops my list of favorite foods, followed closely by biscuits and mashed potatoes, all of which are served at KFC. When it came to food, Colonel Sanders knew exactly what he was doing. And when it came to my health, well, I had no regard. The inviting scent of fried chicken wrapped its arms around us as we walked through the doorway. A bell rang as we entered the restaurant, almost to announce that we had made the correct decision. I stopped and looked around as if we had just entered a sacred place, and perhaps we had. Our grandpa, he told us to get whatever we would like. Challenge accepted, I thought. The menu had poorly lit photos of each item, but I didn't mind. I studied the menu more closely than I studied for any school test. As I ordered, I pointed to photo after photo, remembering to say please and thank you, purposely leaving off the vegetables. Unless you consider mashed potatoes a vegetable. If so, then half of my plate would be designated for vegetables. Moments later, I was handed a full plate with the lingering words, "You got it?" I couldn't tell if the concerned look on the employee's face was due to how much food I ordered or if I would be able to safely take my plate from one end of the establishment to the other. There was no way my soon-to-be greasy hands and salivating mouth were going to let this plate of precious goods drop to the floor. No way. I carefully navigated my way between empty tables to the highly coveted corner booth. Since it was 4 p.m, we had our pick of seats. While the others ordered, I sat patiently admiring what laid before me. Fried chicken, biscuits, mashed potatoes. Was I a king? No, but also, yes. I tried to wait, but the intoxicating scent put a spell on me, stealing my self-control and leading me into a moment of weakness. It started with a nibble of the crispy skin of a chicken leg. This delicious bite led to me shoveling food into my mouth as if I hadn't eaten in days. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, biscuits, there wasn't a bad bite to be taken. Crumbs fell from my lips to my already stained t-shirt. My feet, unable to reach the floor, swung with joy. You would think my jaw was battery operated as it opened and shut without any signs of stopping. My torso bounced back and forth as I did a happy dance in my seat as the food on my plate quickly disappeared. Before I knew it, the food vanished as if I was a magician. I swallowed my last bite as my brother and grandparents stepped to the table with their plates. To their surprise, I had already finished my meal. "Tanner!" exclaimed my grandma as she approached the scene of the crime. "Where did your food go? We didn't even say grace." Now, I wanted to tell her that I had been thanking God with every bite, but I didn't want to push it. There's a fine line, and I usually knew when to cross it, but this time I didn't. For the next 20 minutes, I watched in silence as the three of them slowly ate their dinner. Grandma continued to lecture me about how eating fast wasn't good for me, and how it was rude to eat before others had even gotten their food. I felt two kinds of full: overfull and shameful. Every few minutes, she would mutter how I was going to feel sick. And, she was right. My stomach was beginning to turn as it worked overtime, attempting to process the already processed food. Every now and again, my body would jerk as I'd weather the storm of another food-induced burp. Some kids like getting into trouble. I didn't, but I somehow always found myself making the wrong choice. Across the table, my brother snickered, laughing at another one of my poorly executed decisions. He always knew better than I did. If my brother was best known for something, it was for doing things correctly. I, on the other hand, I was best known for my impulsive behavior. Every few bites, he would announce how good his food was, mentioning how he was going to savor every bite as if it was his last. He knew all the right things to say. Our grandpa was a man of few words, but in this moment, even his silence felt judgmental. I thought my scolding was over, but Grandma continued to tell me again and again that I needed to learn how to slow down. "Slow down," she would say, before gingerly lifting a fork to her mouth. I know those two words were spoken with love and sincerity, but I couldn't help but feel guilty. She went on to tell me life was not meant to be rushed through, but enjoyed. I've had those two words rolling around in my head ever since she spoke them to me again and again that afternoon in the back corner booth at an empty KFC. There are days when I remember them, but more often than not, those two words are far from my mind. Sometimes it is the truth that is the hardest to remember. I've rushed through meals and moments. I've dreamed of being older when I was young and younger as I grow older. I've blown through celebrations, emotions, and conversations. But those two words continue to remain. Slow down. The other day would have been Grandma's 101st birthday. In her honor, I listened and finally slowed down. I woke up before the alarm sounded, crawled out of bed, and walked a little slower to the kitchen. I put the coffee on and watched through the window as the sun began to make its way above my head. The light seeped through the cracks in the blinds, filling the house with hope. I opened my Bible and read a psalm or two. I wondered how often Grandma would do this. Sit and be, wait and watch, rest and remember. I made toast. I love toast. I waited until it was golden brown just the way I wanted it before removing it from the toaster. I spread butter across the top, adding a little more than I needed, just like Grandma would. I took one bite at a time, savoring every crumb. No longer was I swinging my 8-year-old feet at the corner booth of a KFC. Slow down, I whispered to myself. Grandma was right. Life was not meant to be rushed through, but enjoyed. Just like a plate full of fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and biscuits. Thank you for listening to episode 1 of Walk a Little Slower. Again, this episode was from my book, Walk a Little Slower. It's the introduction chapter. If you enjoyed it, go ahead, pick up a copy of Walk a Little Slower on Amazon or from writtentospeak.com. And that's where you can find me. You can find me at writtentospeak.com, or if you're on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, just search for Written to Speak, and I'll probably come up. If you'd like to support this podcast and my ministry, you can visit patreon.com/writtentospeak to become a patron. Your monthly donations allow me to spread hope and announce love through written and spoken word like this podcast. And I'd like to invite you to subscribe and share this episode of Walk a Little Slower. We are just getting things started, but I have a lot of fun episodes planned and most of them already recorded. So I'll be back next week with another episode of Walk a Little Slower. Until next time, we'll see ya.